China versus America. In China, this entire lunch cost me $3. In the US, it would easily be $35. In China, I can cross half the country on a silent train in about the same amount of time it takes to cross a US city in traffic. But as I found out, that's not the full story. There is a huge mental shock that happens when you travel to the world's two biggest superpowers back to back. When I recently traveled across China, moving from the megacities of the east to the tropical borders of the deep south, I wanted to really test the things that we're constantly told to expect. As Westerners, often headlines feel like they prime us to see China as a kind of rigid, clinical, and completely controlled environment. Before visiting, I subconsciously had some kind of vague image of a gray polluted landscape dominated by security cameras, cold public interactions, and digital systems that would completely shut out any foreigner. That wasn't what I found. But right after visiting China, I took a trip back to the United States. Looks like America. The contrast was shocking, but not really for the reasons you might expect. On the ground in the US, the America from the headlines was largely absent too. Yeah, the high-speed trains might be replaced by the open road and too much traffic. And the cities just aren't as big, but the day-to-day didn't feel as different as I thought it would. So in this video, we're gonna aim to look past the media bias and compare what visiting these two superpowers is actually like on the ground. I'm breaking down my real experience in both countries. We'll look at their transit infrastructure, the reality of public safety, how payment works, the true cost of things in each country, and the human spaces behind the massive echo chamber of geopolitics. To give you some context, I'm an American raised on the East Coast of the United States. For the last 9 years though, I've lived in Germany, where I'm sitting on the grass right now. At least going on my own experience, when you spend a good chunk of your life living outside your home country, you kind of lose your cultural blinders. And you inevitably start to look at your homeland a little bit more objectively, from the outside looking in. So I'm not unbiased, no one is, but when visiting China and the US, I try to see them both as a cultural outsider. This last trip, I spent a week traveling through China, and it wasn't my first time there. And since moving away from the US many years ago, I've made visits back dozens of times. I'm not rooting for a team, I'm just focused on interacting, observing, and enjoying wherever I happen to be. To me, the most obvious contrast between the US and China is how things move. In China, the transit infrastructure feels like stepping into a movie set 50 years in the future. When I was in Shanghai, I took the maglev train from the airport into the city. It literally floats above the track using magnetic levitation. Even though this specific line started operating back in 2004, it still flies past highway traffic at around 300 kilometers per hour, completing the trip from Shanghai Pudong Airport to the edge of the city in around 7 minutes. When you move out of the megacities into the economic heartland, like the city of Hangzhou, the scale of things is just as massive. Hangzhou East Railway Station is a transit hub larger than almost any airport terminal in Europe or the US. Walking through it, it's hard to even believe you're just in a train station. For just under $12, I boarded a second-class bullet train that departed at the exact second it was supposed to, ran silently at over 300 kilometers per hour, and covered around 200 kilometers in 45 minutes. In China, these fast trains have made domestic flying on many routes feel like an unnecessary relic of the past. Transit in the US, on the other hand, feels different, until it doesn't. Land in New York City or travel through the American Midwest, and at first glance the infrastructure feels like a different century entirely. Bridges and trains often look like they stopped improving decades ago. I mean, as much as I love it, the New York City subway system is ancient and it's very loud. Plus, in places like Minneapolis or Chicago, if the weather gets slightly difficult, the whole domestic flight network starts to get delays, leaving you stuck for hours in legacy terminals with broken seats and old carpet. But while China probably makes you think of trains, the US is known for the open road. Traveling in the US usually means relying on driving, and road maintenance can be a total gamble. Just drive across the county line and everything might change immediately. From smooth asphalt to potholes, random closures, or even bridges in various states of decay. I've gotta say, looking out the train window in China at the endless landscapes of high-rise apartments and industry, I couldn't help but wonder why a country with the wealth of the United States, so the richest country in the history of the world, lacks infrastructure like that. But you also have to look at the underlying trade-off. Now, let me just say, surveillance isn't unique to China. Private companies and even government agencies in the US are constantly tracking your data and your movements too. But the difference is the integration. In China, that data is fuel for efficiency. Your face is your ticket, your wallet, and your ID, all synced into one national rhythm. It feels seamless mostly because it's all so centralized. In America, transit is often frustrating, slow, and fragmented because the systems don't talk to each other. There's the friction of 1,000 different public and private entities all pulling in a different direction. But in the end, whether you're waiting on a face scanner in Hangzhou or stuck with a delayed flight in Chicago, you're still just a traveler dealing with a massive system designed to process crowds. And that collective, heavily monitored setup brings the topic of safety to mind. I've seen so many people lately talking about how safe China is. And it's definitely a very safe country, 100% by my standard, but there is still crime there. On the other hand, you'll always hear about how dangerous the US is. And it undoubtedly has some issues with safety, but how bad is it really? Luckily, both countries have a ton of public data available on crime, and if you look at the numbers, the contrast is pretty wild. On average, general crime levels are about 3 times higher in the US, and burglaries are roughly 8 times more common than they are in China. But it's really the violent crime that shows a distinct difference between the two countries. A massive driver behind those violent crime stats is gun access. In China, civilian gun ownership is strictly illegal. Private firearms basically just don't exist on the street. Meanwhile, the US has more guns than actual people. Let that sink in for a second. So, sure, why not? Guns don't kill people, people kill people. But as it turns out, when people have easy access to guns, they do it 4 times more often. But there's a wild quirk in this data that shows how easy it can be to misread things. If you look at the total, absolute number of annual murders, both countries are actually almost neck and neck at around 13,000 per year. China even has more by a little bit. But you've got to remember that China has about 4 times the population of the US. China's around 1.4 billion, while the US is a little under 350 million. So if you break it down per capita, the murder rate in the US is about 4 times higher than in China. What's a little bit harder to quantify is perceived safety, but this is also mostly what you experience when traveling in either of these countries. When I was traveling through China, at least from what I could understand through daily interactions, 3, 2, 1... Okay. The locals genuinely felt safe. Like, completely second nature safe. No worries at all about crime. In the US though, honestly, I've very rarely heard anybody say that they feel safe in the exact same kind of way. There, it just feels more important to always carry a baseline level awareness of your surroundings. So, you saw the numbers. The US does have more crime than China by a lot. But I think an even bigger driver of the culture of fear as it pertains to crime in the US is the fact that the media is talking about crime literally all the time. And the fact that a lot of social media networks essentially reward sensationalizing crime as much as possible. People are constantly being told how dangerous everything is. And I personally find that a lot of people I talk to are obsessively worried about it. I really can't say for sure since I just don't know Chinese media well enough. But I really get the impression that there's slightly less of a sensationalized focus on crime in their media there. And yeah, in China, we walked places at all hours, and it really didn't feel dangerous to us. But to be fair, I do that in most of the United States too without thinking twice. But as a traveler in China, you're likely to realize that the feeling of safety there doesn't come for free. There are cameras tracking everything, and advanced systems in place that make anonymous street crime highly unlikely to happen. But that level of absolute security relies entirely on every single person there being perfectly plugged into the national data network. All that aside, as a traveler, that's where you also often hit a wall. While China's system is designed to be seamless and ultra secure for its 1.4 billion citizens, for an outsider like me, that seamlessness can quickly turn into a little bit of a digital cage. Another huge contrast between the US and China is how you pay for stuff. In China, basically everything runs on one centralized digital economy. Cash has basically become a relic, and international credit cards often aren't accepted. Pretty much everything runs on phone apps like WeChat and Alipay. When we stopped at a Starbucks at one of Shanghai's railway stations, the entire place operated like an automated factory line. It might be partially due to my near non-existent Chinese skills, but there was no small talk. We'll talk more about language later in the video though, so stay tuned for that. But in general, in the US, we really value the social pastime of small talk, even if it slows stuff down a little. In China, I guess maybe that's seen as a little bit of an inefficiency. I don't really know. Perhaps the politeness is in the speed. In that sense, it kind of felt similar to Germany. But as a foreign visitor to China, the digital setup of everything can also have quite a learning curve. In the southern town of Xishuangbanna, at a riverfront restaurant along the Mekong, my wife and I simply couldn't use the digital menu in our phones. But in a big city like Shanghai, it's more common for foreign visitors to roll through. So they seemed a little more ready with translation apps or even English language menus for you. In general, in China though, you don't just use the app, you almost are the app. If your phone fails or you lose connection, you're basically locked out of society. And on the topic of internet, in China, much of it is blocked. This is often referred to as the Great Firewall. Many common websites and apps you're used to, Google Maps or YouTube for example, are officially blocked. There are local Chinese versions of basically every app, so locals mostly just use those. But as a traveler, you can still access the tools you need. It just means getting a good VPN. For my trip, I used Surfshark VPN pretty much all the time. I was able to browse through the internet freely and even upload videos to my YouTube channel. I've been using Surfshark for many years now, and it's always helped me in my travels. So if you're looking for a VPN right now, you can get a special discount using my affiliate link down in the description. Anyway, when it comes to the US, payment is way different from China. There are some point-of-sale systems that use QR codes nowadays, but for the most part, it's going to be either cash or card just about everywhere. Paying with cash can kind of feel primitive to me, but there is a profound relief for many people in it. I guess it kind of means the transaction entirely exists between just two people and can't be tracked on any central server anywhere. I mean, in the US, there are people that live entirely off of the grid. I just can't say I saw anything like that in China, but maybe it does exist. If you know about something like that, definitely drop a comment below. For me though, the biggest difference when it comes to payment between China and the US has to be the tipping culture in the United States. Every time I return to the US, more and more places seem to be visibly asking for tips, and the amount of those tips seems to have increased. Say you sit down at a Waffle House in Florida, and a $10 waffle quickly becomes $12 or $13 once you add the 6% tax and a 20% tip. In China, all of that literally does not exist. Things cost what they say they cost. No tips and no hidden math at the cash register. Comparing the two honestly makes payment in the US seem exhausting. But the true biggest difference I encountered between the US and China as a traveler wasn't how safe it felt, it was the actual cost of everything. When you look at the daily costs of travel between the two countries, the numbers honestly don't even make sense at first. Our average daily per person cost while traveling in China was $39.54, and we really were not roughing it. When we checked into a mid-tier hotel in Hangzhou, the room felt nicer than almost any business hotel in the West. Automatic blinds, smart lights, and high-tech heated toilets as standard. Food costs were just as crazy. At a local restaurant, a massive feast for two cost us just 139 yuan or around $20 US, and we had a huge lunch for 21 yuan, which is just a little bit over $3 US. Since sales tax was already included and there is no tipping, those were the actual prices we paid. I mean, at just under $40 US per day to visit, China is one of the cheapest countries in the world for that kind of trip. In the US today, pricing is incredibly different. Any kind of middle tier of affordable comfort is pretty much dead there. If you're talking about a prime location, a basic outdated roadside motel easily costs $150, while a meal for $3 only exists in a grocery store. Inflation definitely plays a role in the US and most Western countries, turning basic convenience into a premium luxury for someone visiting. But when you look closer, the pressure equalizes to some degree. You've got to consider local purchasing power when you're visiting a place. Wages in the US are on average between 3 and 4 times higher than they are in China. So while eating a $3 meal in China might feel like a miracle to an American traveler, for a local worker on a local salary, it represents a much larger chunk of their daily take-home pay. In the US, you might say that you pay for your freedom and your infrastructure with high prices at the cash register. Although a lot of that's going to subsidize billionaires and massive corporations. But in China, the low costs are the byproduct of a massive state-managed manufacturing machine and a much lower labor cost. You could look at it as a kind of trade-off. The US offers a higher earning ceiling, but also has a much higher floor for survival. China offers an incredibly high standard for very little money, but only provided you stay within the digital and economic boundaries of their system. It's just that if you're bringing money from a Western country to China, it's a whole lot cheaper. But beyond just money, to really understand the difference between the US and China, you've got to get out there and go places where tourists don't usually go. This is not what I thought I'd find in China. I think the biggest mistake we make about China in the West is assuming that the country is just some kind of monolithic gray block. Maybe more than anything, it's just the association with the word communism. I don't know. But actually visiting, you realize that much like in the US, there's a kaleidoscope of cultures in China too. I'll often talk to people from various parts of the world who somehow envision every American as some kind of white, gun-toting cowboy. Obviously, that's very, very far from the truth. In Xishuangbanna, still in China but near the border of Laos, any clinical image of the country vanishes. The air is tropical and Mandarin blends with the local Dai script. Suddenly you're surrounded by Buddhist temples and a river culture that to me felt a lot more like Southeast Asia than what I knew of China. Comparing China to the US, even the landscapes reveal a split in values. In the US, the goal of a national park is basically to keep it looking like humans were never there. You hike for miles on dirt trails to find a view, and the reward is solitude. In China, it almost feels like the opposite. Now, to be fair, my time in China was spent in or near urban areas. But when you have a country with less land and 4 times more people than the US, the concept of nature changes. In the US, we value the wild, the idea that you can get lost still. In China, even the natural spaces I visited felt managed, paved, and designed for massive throughput. It's hard to imagine really feeling out in nature there in comparison to places I visited in the rural US. Basically, in America, nature feels like a kind of retreat from the system. From my limited experience in China, nature feels like another part of the system that has been optimized for the crowd. But more generally, the whole concept of space between the two countries feels different. In the US, freedom often means the right to retreat into your own private space, so probably your backyard or your car. In China, the community owns the street. Life happens in public. In a local park in Xishuangbanna, I found elderly people exercising together. Just down the road, youth were having an intense street dance battle. But the majority of Americans live in the suburbs, and most suburbs shut down by about 9 p.m. In China, the evening seems to thrive long past midnight. In Xishuangbanna, we stopped at a local barbershop where the welcome was incredibly human. They washed my hair twice, spent 40 minutes on the cut to make it look like Messi, and handed me warm water, all for $5. Okay, 谢谢. Bye. In the US, English is the default. Spanish is widely spoken, as are other languages too. Even Mandarin has a lot of native speakers in the US. In China, though, the language barrier feels very real. But that's mostly because I don't speak much Mandarin. In the past, this would have made the country impenetrable. I mean, it really did during my pre-COVID visits. But today, the same digital infrastructure that tracks all of your data also helps you to communicate. I spent my recent week in China in a constant kind of digital dance. Ni hao, hello. First trying to communicate with the words I knew, then usually speaking into a phone, waiting a second for the translation, and then usually watching the other person nod. It lacks the nuance of a real conversation, but it allows for moments of genuine connection that were impossible a decade ago. The modern world can sometimes seem a little ironic. Technology has become so advanced that you can have a conversation with a barber in a remote southern town in China without sharing a single common word besides Messi's name. But even though I don't speak much Chinese, I found that pretty much everybody treated me like I get treated everywhere else. Even the way people treat me when I visit certain parts of the US that have a much different dialect or culture than I'm used to. Often interested, usually kind, and pretty much business as usual. But when you visit both of these countries back to back like this, you realize that China and the United States are often seen as ideological mirrors of each other. They're basically locked in a massive trade-off. It's safe to say that America loves the ideas of personal freedom, privacy, and individual choice. But that makes it prone to stuff like aging infrastructure, vast inequality, and inflation. China, on the other hand, has built a hyper-efficient, breathtakingly seamless daily experience. But that also means that your personal data is constantly being tracked, and the focus shifts away from individual freedoms. But here's the real answer that the internet completely misses. Despite wildly different systems, these two massive countries are remarkably the same in the end. But when it comes to China and the US, neither is objectively better than the other. I just didn't find a definitive winner in terms of best place to visit. China definitely wins on value if you're bringing money from a Western country, but the US is a place with more diversity than just about anywhere. If your core values are personal privacy, individual autonomy, and at least the perceived freedom of existing without always being tracked, there is a raw, unmonitored freedom to the American landscape that a centralized system simply cannot allow. But if you ask me which country left me with an intoxicating sense of raw forward momentum, it's definitely China. Depending which media consumed, we're trained to look at these two giants through various lenses of fear and absolute division. When you look past all that, both countries are just massive human systems trying to solve the exact same problems. But the uniqueness of experiencing both of them is exactly why I keep traveling. To see the world as it actually is on the ground, before someone else tries to tell me what to think. If you haven't yet seen my China or US series, give them a watch now. There's so much more to both of these countries than what you'll see in the media. Thank you, xie xie, gracias, and I'll see you in the next video.